Hi, and thank you for listening to Dream 10X Radio, where we interview people attempting to live extraordinary lives. Our twofold purpose is to both direct and inspire people bold enough to do the same. Dream 10X. Face your fears and make your life count. Hello, everybody out there in Dream 10X land. It's your boy JC
and Dr. Capel.
And happy Memorial Day. Today is Monday, May 31st, and we are both off from work today and sitting out in our back patio. And you can probably hear it. All the, what do you call them? They're not locusts. They're
cicadas.
Cicadas are up in the trees making a bunch of noise because it's a very sunny afternoon, very warm, and they're trying to mate vigorously.
Shouldn't we all be trying to mate?
Let me just pause right there.
And we're back.
I was talking to my daughter recently about the life cycle of the cicadas and how pointless it all seems for them. She was mentioning how pointless the whole existence seems because you live underground for 17 years. They basically tap into a root of a tree for subsistence or whatever nutrients they get from the tree root. And then 17 years later, these cicadas crawl out of the ground, they crawl to the tops of the trees, they mate, and then they just die. They fall back to the base of the tree. And yeah, it seems like a really pointless existence to spend that much time underground. But I also thought, sometimes in life, this is me trying to be philosophical here, but sometimes in life we do things that seem totally pointless to us, but in the bigger scheme of things, they're not. They can be quite important. In the case of the cicadas, they're aerating the ground when they come out of the ground, and they fertilize the tree when they die, to name two things. I'm not really sure what other things that they do, but those are two very important roles that they play. Now, why every 17 years? That's really weird. But I guess the cycles for cicadas are different, from community to community or state to state or locale to locale. I don't know much about them, but they do provide an important purpose. Mm-hmm. And I was also telling your dad, last time they came out of the ground, we went fishing with my son and his cousin, and you could hook the cicada onto a hook and it would fly around, and the second it would hit the water, a bass would hit it.
Oh, cool.
So they are valuable. They do form they do have a purpose. Mm-hmm. I don't know, I was just thinking that, not everything we do, even though it may seem purposeless to us, everything serves a purpose.
It might have greater significant impact on other people.
Yeah,
you don't even know.
Yeah, and you just might not see it. So don't lose sight of that. That's my philosophical thought for the day.
That's very powerful.
So what are we talking about today?
I don't know. I'm all up in what am I doing that's making an impact?
How can I find more purpose in my life, Dr. Cable?
I don't know. You and me both trying to find that.
Yeah? Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to talk about the book Creativity Inc. by Dr. Ed Catmull today. Just finished reading it yesterday. It was very hard for me to get through, and I'm not really sure why. But it took me about 3 weeks to get through the book.
That's a really long time for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to be able to read a book a lot faster, but...
We also had a lot of stuff going on that prevented you from being able to sit down and read.
Yeah, but towards the end of it, I got really motivated to get, through it and learn more about it. It's mostly, I was surprised to learn, basically a management book, in my opinion. It's how to be a better manager. And honestly, it kind of lost me on that. But the backstory is what really fascinated me. And so I thought, and so you listened to it on iTunes or whatever, right?
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook and I loved it from the very beginning.
Yeah,
it totally spoke to me, but I think it's partly because what I do in leadership development, and it was focused on building creative cultures through. So for me, it was very validating about the things that I'm trying to do in my current job to make our culture more creative and empower people and those kinds of things. So it was really nice to hear a wildly successful business at a company I really want to work for someday and how they got there. So yeah, for me, it was immediately engaging.
Yeah, cool. For me, it was immediately engaging too, but only because of the story, the backstory of Pixar. But then when he started, Dr. Catmull got into more managerial stuff. I don't know, my eyes kind of glazed over. But I do recognize the importance of the lessons that he was trying to impart. It's just hard to put it in context. But once you start to learn the context of what he was actually going through and how he was learning it, it's much more intriguing.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
So the backstory for me, to recount what I read, was that Dr. Catmull started out as a kid with an interest in computer animation and a desire to create a feature-length film using nothing but computers. So when you think back to the 70s and 80s, that kind of thing didn't exist. So this guy and the people he hung around were really, what's the word? Their work was revolutionary for the world of computer graphics and movie making. So that, given that context, it's really a fascinating book and fascinating to learn about the technology that they helped develop to facilitate that. And that's what I was hoping to pull more out of the book, more of a technological focus on computer animation and movie making and all that. There were just little tiny hints of it here and there, and it was mostly managerial stuff. So that's why I was a little bit disappointed.
Well, and he said that in the back end, when he was like going through, they have a thing at Pixar called Notes Day, where they really get everybody engaged, everybody in the company engaged to solve organizational problems, which I think is brilliant. But he said, specifically in there were a lot of technical problems that people wanted to solve. I'm not going to go into those because I think I'm going to lose my readers.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, he was writing it more towards people like me versus technical people.
Yeah. So, interesting. I was in the wrong demographic for this audience, I guess. But so he starts out getting his PhD in computer science from the University of Utah, with a focus on physics and the burgeoning field of computer science, and specifically within computer science, computer animation, computer graphics. And he starts off with animating his hand using a computer, and that became like groundbreaking work at the time. And he gets hired away by the New York Institute of Technology. So he then he's tasked with building a technical team around him for the first time. This is basically his first job, and his first task is to build a team. So I understand the importance of the managerial aspects of it, because he's trained as a computer science, he's a doctorate, and then the first thing he has to do when he starts working in the real world is manage people. So that's like a ground shift in everything that he was trained so far to do.
And think about that happens all the time. You're in organizations. Oh, you're really good at your job. You're really good at this technical thing. So we're going to promote you to supervisor. Yeah. Even though you have no leadership experience, no supervisor experience, and we haven't trained you to do anything.
Exactly.
So it happens all the time. So.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why this book came out of him. I'm sure of it. So anyway. He hires his first employee, who is another PhD, Alvy Ray Smith, out of Texas. He's got experience from Berkeley and Stanford, and he's worried about hiring him because this guy seems so much smarter than himself, and he's worried that if he hires him, he's eventually going to replace him in the organization. In fact, the opposite happened. They became very complementary, skill-wise and personality-wise, or whatever. And so that became one of his big lessons learned: is that always try to hire somebody smarter than yourself, and don't be worried about being replaced. So that definitely resonated with me, because I've definitely been on the other side of the interview table thinking, dang, this guy is really smart. And thinking the same thing. If I hire him, I'm probably going to get replaced by him at some point, or her, whatever, this person. So that was something a key thing I took away from there was that thought that you should always hire somebody that's smarter than yourself. So that was a good note there. So at NYIT, New York Institute of Technology, he's now working with Alvy Ray Smith, who's a brilliant peer, and starting to build a brilliant technical team around himself. And all of a sudden, somebody from George Lucas's company starts talking to him, and his name was Richard Edlund. And in the book, he's portrayed as somebody who comes into the office to talk with him, trying to be low-key about the meeting because he doesn't want anybody in the company to know he's kind of looking around for another job or talking to other companies. But Richard comes in with a big Star Wars belt buckle on, and I thought that was really colorful imagery. This guy coming in, doesn't care what anybody thinks, got the big Star Wars belt. Oh, hey, I work for George Lucas, so I thought that was pretty cool. So then I dug in a little bit on who Richard Edlund was. Really interesting character. So this is another real interesting sideline in this book. There's a lot of interesting sidelines and backstories that intrigue me a lot more than the core of this book. Richard Edlund worked on Battlestar Galactica as well, and Empire Strikes Back. So those are big. I was a big fan of both of those.
Me too.
Growing up, so that's cool to know that about him. He was also married to a woman named Rita Kogan, and Rita Kogan was the only daughter of a man named Michael Kogan, who was the founder of. So Michael Kogan was from the Ukraine, but he founded the Japanese Teisho company, and they're the ones who made game boxes and the old school video things. Like they made Space Invaders for one.
Oh yes!
So that is another fascinating story about Michael Kogan and his life. And I need to research if there's any books out there about him, but he came from the Ukraine. He was pushed out by the Russians as a part of the Jewish pushing Jews out during World War II. He kind of got taken in under the by the Japanese, who wanted to help with the Jews then. Really fascinating story there. So anyway, that was just a little tidbit that I found really interesting. So then once they ended up at Lucasfilm, so George Lucas was cutting edge at the time, trying to develop new. He was interested in using computers to help in the movie production process in some way. And other than George Lucas, there was nobody else who was even remotely in that mindset at the time. So Catmull and Smith and others that came over from NYIT were then now at Lucasfilm, trying to help push the cutting edge in terms of using computing technology in the movie making process. They ultimately created a computer called the Pixar, which helped integrate real movie footage with computer-generated images that would then merge the two and then rewrite that back out to a film. And that was kind of their innovation while they were there at Lucasfilm. And the irony, though, was that most of the movie producers, the movie animators or whatever there at Lucasfilm didn't really want anything to do with computers in their production process. They didn't see a use for it. And then also kind of around that same time, George Lucas went through a divorce, so that kind of put additional financial pressure on his whole enterprise and had to scale back a little bit. So the first thing he decided to cut was the computer division within ILM, Lucasfilm, or whatever. So that was these guys, right? This is so good. So George Lucas starts looking around for buyers and spent many months talking to different organizations, including I think General Electric or General Motors or something like that, and some other companies, and just nothing was really working. And then around the same time, Steve Jobs gets kicked out of Apple. He's mad, I'm sure, as the founder of Apple, to be booted out by the board. He's very upset about that and wants retribution and wants another ship to jump onto to kind of make his mark on the world, to continue making his mark on the world. So after Jobs leaves Apple, he forms the Next Computer Corporation. And Next was basically a combination of hardware and software. It was a Unix-like operating system. They did some object-oriented stuff. Somebody at Apple introduced Catmull to Steve Jobs, and that's how they got introduced through I think it was the CTO at Apple or something like that. Hooked the two of them up. So then Steve Jobs became interested in purchasing the computer division of Lucasfilm. So ultimately they came to an agreement. Jobs wanted to buy them out, but he wanted to take the Pixar computer that Catmull and Smith had developed and sell that as a competitor to like Apple and whatever, because I guess he was still in the mindset of being in the personal computing space. But those two guys, they didn't line up with what they wanted to do. They wanted to make a feature-length computer animated film. So they said, "Sorry, that's not what we're interested in." So they told Jobs, "No, we don't want to do that." So Jobs continued working on Next and whatever, and kind of went away for a while. And then after a while, came back and said, "All right, I'd be interested in doing, investing in the company and letting you guys run it the way you want to run it, but I would be primary owner of it." So long story short, Jobs pays $5 million for it, for the computer division within Lucasfilm, spins it out of Lucas. It becomes wholly owned by Steve Jobs, who owns 70% of the stock, and then the rest of the employees got 30%, and then he injected $5 million of his own cash into the company to give them some runway to develop their first feature-length film. And so that's how Pixar was born. And because of the name of the computer, they used that to call their company Pixar. And that's great. I never knew that story. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I thought they were self-funded and things, and then Steve Jobs came in later. So it was really interesting to read, like, the whole birth of the company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weird serendipitous events that happen as well in this story. And in one of our previous podcasts, we talked about the Ride of a Lifetime book written by Bob Iger, who was the CEO of Disney. And so Bob Iger plays very strongly in this book as well, because Disney has a very big role in the future of Pixar. And so all these interconnections are very, very interesting. And one of which was the story of John Lasseter. You remember him, the creative director of Pixar? So when Catmull was at Lucasfilm, a bunch of bigwigs would come through there all the time, like Steven Spielberg and other organizations, just kind of looking at how they were doing things. And the Disney Animation Studio came through there one time, and John Lasseter's first job was at Disney Animation, and so he was one of the younger people coming through looking at some of the work that was being done. He was taken away by some of the computer stuff that Catmull and his team had put together. And his personal dream also was, he had some story about a toaster or something like that, and he wanted to make that using computer animation. And that was what was driving him. So he was really fascinated with the work that was going on at Lucasfilm. And so he continued pushing on that at Disney Animation, and they ultimately fired him because Disney Animation wasn't at all interested in computer animation. This is John Lasseter. The irony is that Pixar hired John Lasseter, and then he ends up becoming one of the heads of animation at Disney after Disney purchases Pixar. So that was a really interesting twist, I thought. The other interesting twist with Lasseter, of course, was after Disney purchased Pixar, and Lasseter becomes head of creative director or whatever. He gets in trouble with sexual harassment cases start coming up against him, and Bob Iger has to let him go.
I didn't realize that. Wow.
And Bob Iger in his book, The Ride of a Lifetime, mentions that was one of the hardest decisions that he had to make as the CEO of Disney.
Dang.
Really, really fascinating, huh?
Yeah.
Another interesting aspect of the whole backstory was Steve Jobs being very concerned about the stability of Pixar. So now they're spun out of Lucasfilm, they're chugging along, they're working. None of them know if they're going to be successful at all. They don't even know. No one's ever generated a computer animated full feature-length film before. So, I mean, if you think about that, it's such a risk, such a very scary, exciting time to be a part of a company that you don't even know you can do what you want to do. As history, hindsight's 2020 or whatever, they were hugely successful with the release of Toy Story, and that became the first computer-generated full feature-length film, and blockbuster success, hugely successful. So that's great. So now there is some anecdotal evidence that what they're doing can be successful, but still, they have to hurry up and have another great success in order to keep the company going.
I thought part of that issue, though, was with Toy Story, because they were making like little animated films, but they knew how to do really excellent computer animated movies, but they didn't have any like storyline, so they needed storytellers in order to be able to help them make this.
Well, I think that's what John Lasseter's strength was.
Yeah, as to how to actually tell a story. Yeah,
and the creative aspects of it. Yeah, but also it took like 2 to 3 years to generate a film.
Yeah,
and so you got to have a bucket of money to get you through the drive, and they didn't have the scale to work on multiple feature films all at the same time.
Yeah.
Then it was just like, all right, we got one success. Now we got to start working on the next one, which we're not going to be able to release for another 2 to 3 years. Which we don't even know if we're going to succeed. And what if we fail after 2 years and that movie's a flop? We're done. So there was this long period in Pixar's life where they were like, they could not fail. They did not have any room to fail. And that's really, put yourself in the shoes of an employee in a company like that. I've been in a company like that. It's scary.
And at the same time, they were able to create a empowering culture where failure's okay in small, like, we're going to have failure. So one of the things I loved about what he said is that I have a vision for what the end is like, and we're going to fail over and over and over and over again, and that vision is going to change at the end. And those small failures are okay because we're going to learn from them. So it's actually creating a culture of risk. While at the end result is we have to do a successful film, it's okay if you take a risk.
Yeah,
and
he says that. I mean, any manager says that, right?
No.
Well, a lot
Many don't.
A lot do, but I think the financial reality was they could not afford to fail.
Yeah.
Like, if they failed, the company disappears.
Yeah.
And one of the great stories that he tells was when somebody, this is only like one of the few technical things that he mentioned in the book, was when somebody accidentally did an RM-RS star on one of their Linux directories that had all of the Toy Story images that they had created.
So what does that mean to us non-computer people?
It's a Unix command to remove everything with extreme prejudice. Like, just get rid of it. Just delete it all. And somebody did that in the directory that had all the Toy Story images in it, and they were gone. And they didn't have any backups of it.
Well, they did have a backup, but the backup failed.
Right.
Yeah.
So the only saving grace was the woman who was working from home on maternity leave, who was backing up files to her local computer.
Which she wasn't supposed to be doing.
Yeah, which she wasn't. She saved the company from...
She broke the rules and saved the company. Yes!
Yeah.
These are my people.
But yeah, I mean, just so many little stories like that. It just, is it luck? Is it divine providence? I don't know. But anyway, they were very precariously situated for a number of years, and one of the ways Steve Jobs wanted to solve that was to take the company public. And so that's how he pitched the idea of taking the company public to the head guys. And I have a feeling it was a sales pitch, because the one who really benefited financially from going public was Steve Jobs. But at the same time, it did help to guarantee some stability to the employees of the company. So win-win scenario, win-win sales job there. A lot of win-win sales jobs in the life of this company and Disney and all that. It's really interesting to think about. So they timed it just right. I think it was the release of Toy Story 2, or
I think so, yeah.
Something like that. So as soon as Toy Story 2, I think, came out, they went public, and that release was extremely popular as well. Did great. Company goes public. That's the move that made Steve Jobs a billionaire, when they took Pixar public, which I thought was interesting. I thought, well, shoot, he started Apple.
But it has nothing to do with Apple, which made his money. It was all Pixar.
Yeah, Pixar
Wow.
is what made him all his money.
Dang.
That was another thing I thought was really interesting. So then that got the company some stability, and then he, some period later, pitched him again and said, "Hey, you guys are on a yacht right now. You're pretty stable in the big rolling waves of the marketplace. But if you want to be on a cruise ship, we need to get on a cruise ship to be even more safe. And in order to do that, we need to sell to a bigger company." And that's when he started talking to Michael Eisner, who then was the CEO of Disney. But Jobs and Eisner didn't click. They didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. They couldn't do a deal. So, and if you read, and we read about that in Bob Iger's book. So when Bob Iger comes to the helm, negotiations start again between Disney and Jobs about Pixar. And Disney Animation has been flagging for a number of years. They haven't had any, I think it was something like 16 years or something. They hadn't had a good animated release. And so they were hungry for some, they needed creativity. They needed to rejuvenate their creativity at Disney Animation. And they looked at Pixar as a way to do that. So it was a really good thought, I think, to merge those two companies. At least it appears that way to me. So Disney Animation was flagging, Pixar was kicking ass. Why not bring the two together and bring the old school in with the new school, the old school artistry in with the new school use of technology to do that and create a whole new thing.
Yeah.
And
it was Nemo that they went public after. Because Toy Story 2, there was a whole issue with Disney and them.
Oh, was it Nemo?
Yeah, it was Nemo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just remembering, sorry. Not that
Yeah.
it's relevant, except that for Toy Story 2, there was a conflict between Disney and Pixar because they wanted to go straight to video, and Pixar says, no, we don't want to go straight to video, we
You're
want
right.
to do a feature film. And,
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so the whole deal with Pixar and Disney was really cool, I think.
Yeah.
And so then, long story short, they brought in Pixar into Disney. Bob Iger does a all stock deal with Jobs. Jobs walks away with $7.4 billion. Well, the sell of the company was $7.4 billion. And there's a really touching paragraph in the book where at the end of that deal they had to address the employees. I think Pixar was like 400 and it was like 41 employees when they sold to Disney for $7.4 billion. I mean, that little number there. If you think about that, that is 41 people made $7.4 billion for Steve Jobs. That's amazing.
That is amazing.
That is really amazing. There's a lot of talk on Steve Jobs' part about how small, smart teams can outperform large teams. When Steve Jobs left Next, he took about 8 employees with him from Apple to help start the company. And because he had done that, Apple in turn sued him, because they thought he was going to be a big threat to them. Wow. And his quote was, when they got sued, "It is hard to think that a $2 billion company with 4,300 plus people couldn't compete with 6 people in blue jeans."
That's brilliant.
I love that.
That's brilliant.
It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, small sets of smart people can outperform huge organizations, and Steve Jobs knew that very intimately. So I thought that was really cool. But anyway, so they sell to Disney. The other interesting things there were that, I was talking about the small paragraph in there that was very touching, where when they addressed the employees after the merger, they all went up to Lasseter and Catmull, and Jobs went up to Catmull's office, and Steve Jobs hugged them and cried, and tears of relief and joy, and I'm sure he was very happy to be a multi-billionaire at that point as well. But it was just kind of really touching that they had survived all the ups and downs and of that company, not knowing what it was going to do, and becoming one of the biggest things that Steve Jobs ended up doing in his life. Mm-hmm. It's really, really interesting. Really, really cool to think about that.
It's a beautiful story. Like, having passion in something really does make a difference. Having passion and dedication to what you're doing, you can make a difference. Steve Jobs came in one of the Pixar brain trust meetings and said, "I don't like this, and you need to change it." I don't remember what this thing was, but the head of that particular film said, from artistic it was the widescreen versus narrow screen.
Bug's Life.
Yes, thank you. And so in A Bug's Life, apparently for the theaters back in the day, you had to make movies in widescreen. And if you remember, if you're our age, when you put widescreen on a regular TV, you have those dark lines above and below, and the picture's smaller. And so there was a dispute between the marketing folks and the creative folks as to the best approach, and Steve Jobs agreed with the marketing folks, which said we need to cut off the sides and make it for more home
boxy.
TVs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so the creative person fought back, stood toe to toe with Steve Jobs, and said, "No, here's why we can't do that. Here's why it's gonna denigrate the creative integrity, etc." And then Steve walked out, and
with no resolution.
No resolution. And this creative director said to Ed that, "Oh my God, I can't believe I just fought with Steve Jobs.
Am I gonna lose
that was
my
a
job?
terrible idea." And Ed said, "No, I mean, that's exactly, you won the battle because you showed so much passion and reason for what you do. So it's the passion that really helps us to succeed."
And that's apparently what Jobs is like. He liked the argument, not necessarily to win the argument, but to fine-tune his argument. And apparently he had a pretty open mind from some perspectives. It, didn't have to win every argument, but the argument helped him get smarter about how he looked at things.
I feel like I do that a lot. Like, one of the things I love that Ed said in the beginning was, in chapter 2, about having an outward mind. So one of the things that we look at in my world is having an outward mindset and understanding the perspectives as others, because you help to think differently. He also talked about asking better questions. That's the whole reason I got a doctorate, is because I wasn't thinking about things from all perspectives, and I didn't ask really good questions. And so that helped me think about what questions I need to ask to find out where my blind sides are and where I'm not understanding, to have that outward mindset focus. And so he talks about it right there in chapter 2, and I think that's really powerful in order to be able to be a good leader and lead in all these directions and have a vision. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting aspect of the book, talking about blind sides. For leaders to be able to see what's actually going on in the organization that they can't really see a lot of times.
Like when you got promoted.
Yeah, unless there's some kind of bottom-up feedback that people who are in middle management and above can't really see what's going on in the organization. I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that really. So there's a lot of that. How can managers have better visibility into what's going on in the organization? How can the leaders at the top have better visibility? How can you encourage honesty for that information to bubble up from the bottom? I thought that was intriguing.
How do you have radical candor where you at
Yeah.
the bottom level are comfortable
Yeah.
having that discussion?
Where you want to share that information
Yeah,
too, with the organization.
I guess that's where like people like me come in, because even in organizations where it's completely not acceptable, I have very much radical candor where you tell them what's going on, and even if it hurts or it's hard, or you tell them what's going on, and it's the leader's job to hear it. And so I think that's why I've gotten to where I am today in some aspects, or why I haven't gotten to where I should be.
It's not
But-
just the leader's job to hear it. It's the leader's job to cajole and
Create that
poke
environment.
and ask and dig and be curious also. I thought that was kind of an eye-opening thought to me as well.
And that's one of the things I loved about the whole Notes Day. And the Notes Day is where they asked everybody in the organization what's wrong with the organization, and this
Yeah.
is the vision, how do we get here? And John Laster said, apparently I suck. And you guys were willing to say I suck, and I'm going to change it. And that's the thing too, is like, okay, I see this in me, I'm going to change this in myself. And a lot of leaders aren't willing to be that vulnerable. And so I was very impressed with that.
That hurts. I've had that feedback.
It
That-
sucks.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, those things. But back back to the business aspect of it. So here's the other interesting thing. Well, Jobs is really interesting to me. I mean, he's a fascinating character to everybody, I guess. But the fact that he sold Next back to Apple. So he got booted out of Apple, right? The board kicked him out. And then he went and created Next Computers. And then he turns around and he sells Next back to Apple. And that is what became the foundation for OS X in Apple, the operating system. It was
wow.
Mach-based Unix. They brought that in, and that was like a great change for Apple. I mean, Mac OS before that was kind of like, it was crap. But OS X just changed the game for them. And so that was such a brilliant move. Like, how do you I couldn't even think of doing something like that. How did that even come about? It's just brilliant. But add to that he sold the company for Apple shares. So he now he had so much Apple stock at the end of that sale that he was now an Apple advisor, which led him back into becoming the CEO of Apple. That's mind-boggling to me. Like, that is really, really smart.
And was that intentional, that he saw all these strategic moves and deliberately
Right.
took
Is
that
it
approach,
intentional?
or was it?
Is it just luck?
It
Like,
could have been luck. It could have
I
been
mean,
a combination.
How? And same thing with Pixar.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that Pixar is back in Disney, and at the same time, Bob Iger bought Lucasfilm. And
They're
Lucasfilm
all
had
together.
Pixar.
Yep.
He had Pixar before, and he sold it. I mean, that's just, come on.
Yeah.
Like, is this just all orchestrated, or just luck, or what? Had George Lucas held on to Ed Catmull and those guys and the Pixar computer, and had he let them do what they wanted to do within Lucasfilm, Lucasfilm could have been worth so much more.
Or maybe it would have failed, and it was all of these other situations that got Pixar to where they were.
But the fact that all of Lucasfilm only sold for $4 billion
Yeah.
to Disney, and Pixar sold for $7 billion,
Yeah.
that's just incredible.
Well, I think too, and I think it's part of one of the other podcasts that you talked about. Lucasfilms didn't have all the stories written,
Right, yeah.
and Pixar had like 6 or 7 stories ready to go, and Lucas had to
Yeah.
actually write some content so it was worth buying versus
Yeah.
Pixar was like, all right, we got all this stuff to sell you.
Same with Marvel. Marvel
Yeah.
had that whole book. Remember that whole book of characters? Like, hey, we've got a whole. We could do movies from now until the end of time.
I could be the
Here's our
CLO of
book.
Marvel.
But still, still, Marvel only sold for $4 billion too. So
Yeah.
But here's the other interesting thing. So you're like, oh man, George Lucas, he missed out, right? But if you Google the net worth of all these guys, like, or search whatever search engine you want to use, you can get a feel for how much their net worths are. And George Lucas is about around 10 billion, according to what you can find on the web. Whereas it looks like Steve Jobs ended up around 9 billion, you know, and Bob Iger is probably around 9 billion too. So I think George Lucas still came out ahead of all of those people.
He did create Star Wars.
Yeah. And then I was looking at, trying to figure out, well, how much is Ed Catmull worth as, you know, the head of Pixar, and he basically started Pixar with Smith, Alvy Ray Smith. But negligible. I think he's worth around 50 million, I guess, just based on what I can see online. For a company that sold for 7.4 billion, he only made like maybe around 40 or 50 million.
Well, I guess if somebody else owns 70% of the company.
So I'm just talking about that, thinking about how do people position themselves to make so much wealth, to acquire so much wealth. And it's really interesting how things played out with these companies and with Disney. And really, I think in the end, the core figure of it all is Bob Iger. He's the man. Like, out of all of these characters, Bob Iger is probably the one that I respect the most, have the most respect for, just because of how he came up through his chain of command, very bottom of ABC, and how it intersected with Warren Buffett. So it's interesting how the Snowball book about Warren Buffett, the Bob Iger book, and this Creativity Inc., they all kind of intersect in weird ways. You know, Warren Buffett is involved, Bob Iger is involved, Steve Jobs is involved. These are like the big creative financial, some of, if not most of, the creative financial brains of America, I think. I mean, you could argue a whole bunch of others, but it's just interesting how the characters in these books all intersect in some way.
Yeah, definitely.
So anyway, that was my exciting take on the book. Not so much about organizational structure. Do you have any other thoughts that you want to talk about organizational leadership and that kind of thing?
Okay.
Because I thought it was interesting, but it didn't. I was so much more interested in the financial wheelings and dealings by these bigwigs behind the scenes.
Yeah, I thought the integration and the different perspectives, hearing Bob Iger's perspective of the Pixar acquisition, thank you. So the Pixar acquisition versus Catmull's description of it, I think that was fascinating. I would love to hear Steve Jobs' perspective and probably Lasseter's perspective too.
Whose?
Lasseter.
John Lasseter. Yeah.
To really, get more of a full picture. Because I mean, their perceptions were integrated, but also different.
So Creativity Inc. Just reading the title, I was thinking that there's going to be a lot in this book about how to inculcate a culture of creativity in an organization. It just seemed like a bunch of managerial stuff, which to me does not smack of creativity.
So, yes, and it was managerial. It was also very culture focused, and how to create those cultures of creativity. And you can't do that unless you have managers who are open to it. So, how in a management role do you help your people want to take risk? How do you help them be engaged in the organization? How do you help them have radical candor? All of these things. So, without that, the culture won't exist. So that's all I saw was how to build a culture of creativity in there.
Okay. Well, good.
But I'm coming at it obviously from a very different lens.
I like the aspects of the brain trust, establishing a brain trust, and using that to help ensure the quality of your creativity. There's definitely a culture within Pixar of excellence and pushing the envelope. And not just in terms of technology, but in terms of art and creativity. and using that brain trust to help be the litmus test for how the organization is meeting those standards. I thought was really good.
And so you could look at that from a managerial perspective, saying, okay, we're going to do this. But it's very culturally based, wherein the management is creating the space for them to do this. I mean, you think about the transition they talked about at Disney, where they tried to do it, but it didn't quite work so well. So they had to infuse rules and regulations on how this works. And that's very well versed in the literature of a culture of feedback, how to create a culture of giving feedback, which facilitates the culture of risk and facilitates creativity.
Right.
I've experienced this in its wholeheartedness on my last team that I worked in, where, I mean, we gave each other feedback, positive and improvement, all the time. It was just part of who we are, and you don't take it personally. But you have to have that foundational trust piece before you can get to that point. So the one aspect that I was missing in this book is how do you build trust with others? And so I think that would be a precursor for managers to read something like Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey or some other foundational trust book, and then take this after, and building the two, you could really, really foster some powerful creativity in your organization.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The cleanliness of desks.
Oh my God.
And how Catmull saw that as representative of the creativity of an organization. And coming from people who support the government, like, it's almost a rule that you have to keep your desk clean, right? If somebody
no
comes and
personal
visits, and that was very off-putting to Catmull when he went to go visit Disney Animation, because they had the same rules. You got to keep your desk clean, no personal paraphernalia or anything like that. Whereas Pixar, you are highly encouraged to personalize your workspace, from like building entire sets in your cube space or your office space. That's expected of you to help foster creativity and create different visuals within the office space.
I had to laugh so hard when I read that section, because my friend Rachel and I, we worked at Department of Defense together, and we do learning and development. So we have to be creative to create different learning activities that are exciting, whatever. Anyway, so we had all these like Legos and toys and action figures. Our cubicles were facing each other, so on the wall between us we had all of these toys and action figures and things, and we would play over the cubicle wall or throw things at one another. We had all kinds of stuff, and nobody else did.
You didn't get in trouble for that?
Did I care? No, I didn't get in trouble.
So it made me think, though, but why is the government like that? Why does the government...
Because we have the rules.
Why, though? Like, in the spirit of... Shouldn't the government, U.S. government, want to encourage creativity across all sectors and allow... This is a freedom-loving country, you know? It's funny.
It is. It's a... And some, I think, agencies foster those type of experiences more than others.
Yeah. Like,
some really would really embrace it and others wouldn't. I think it's just really dependent on where you work.
So. Okay. Well, on that note, let's conclude this podcast. Creativity Inc. It's a very fascinating book. I've dog-eared almost every single page. More and more, I'm like, I don't know how I can assimilate stuff in these books. You basically have to read. I have to read 3 or 4 times, and I don't have the time to. There's so many other books I want to read. But all right, thanks for listening to episode 29. We will talk to you soon. Over and out.
Bye.